I wanted to talk about this because the whole thing with Taiwan, China, and Taiwan, I don't think China really is. I think this is a distraction. I think the whole thing of them saying people think they're going to go into Taiwan, I think their real goal is to go after Japan, and it's because of this. This historical event is so horrific. I mean, that very few people even have heard about it. If you have, it's terror. It's really messed up what happened. It's known as the rape of Nanking from 1937 to 1938. 300 deaths, and this was done by the in December of 37. The Japanese Imperial Army marched into China's capital city of Nanking and proceeded to murder 300,000 out of 600,000 civilians and soldiers in the city. The 6 weeks of carnage would become known as the Rape of Nanking and represented the single worst atrocity during the World War II era in either the European or Pacific theaters of war. This is true. This is even worse when you look at it than even the Holocaust. I'm not kidding. Because when you read what happened here, and China has never forgotten any of this. This, if anything, the Taiwan thing, I would say, okay, everyone thinks they're going to go there, but I think their real goal is to get revenge on Japan for this. And it's understandable why they would still hold a grudge because nobody involved in this was held accountable. Our government let them get away with it. For all their war crimes, Japan was never, besides the fact that we dropped 2 bombs on them to stop them, make them surrender, they were never, no one in the military was ever held accountable for this or any of the other atrocities that they committed. And I have another video after this I'll do about more of their war crimes. Yeah. The actual military invasion of Nanking was preceded by a tough battle at Shanghai that began in the summer of 37. Chinese forces there put up surprisingly stiff resistance against the Japanese army, which had expected an easy victory in China. The Japanese had even bragged they would conquer all of China in just 3 months. The stubborn resistance by the Chinese troops upset the timetable, with the battle dragging on through the summer into late fall. This infuriated the Japanese and whetted their appetite for the revenge that was to follow at Nanking. After finally defeating the Chinese at Shanghai in November, 50,000 Japanese soldiers then marched on towards Nanking. Unlike the troops at Shanghai, Chinese soldiers at Nanking reportedly led and loosely organized. Although they greatly outnumbered the Japanese and had plenty of ammunition, they withered under the ferocity of the Japanese attack, then engaged in a chaotic retreat. After just 4 days of fighting, Japanese troops smashed into the city on December the 13th, 1937, with orders issued to kill all captives. Their first concern was to eliminate any threat from the 90,000 Chinese soldiers who surrendered. To the Japanese, surrender was an unthinkable act of cowardice and the ultimate violation of the rigid code of military honor drilled into them from the childhood onward. Thus, they looked upon Chinese POWs with utter contempt, viewing them as less than human, unworthy of life. The elimination of the Chinese POW began after they were transported by trucks to remote locations on the outskirts of Nanking. As soon as they were assembled, the savagery began, with young Japanese soldiers encouraged by their superiors to inflict maximum pain and suffering upon individual POWs as a way of toughening themselves up for future battles. Also, to eradicate any civilized notions of mercy, filmed footage and still photographs taken by the Japanese themselves document the brutality. Smiling soldiers can be seen conducting bayonet practice on live prisoners, decapitating them, displaying severed heads as souvenirs, and proudly standing among mutilated corpses. Some of the Chinese POWs were simply mowed down by machine gun fire, while others were tied up, soaked with gasoline, and burned alive. After the destruction of the POWs, the soldiers turned their attention to the women of Nanking. An outright animalistic hunt ensued. Old women over the age of 70, as well as little girls under the age of 8, were dragged off to be sexually abused. More than 20,000 females, with some estimated as high as 80,000, were gang raped by Japanese soldiers, then stabbed to death with bayonets, or shot so they could never bear witness. Pregnant women were not spared. In several incidents, they were raped, then had their babies' bellies split open and the fetuses torn out, sometimes after storming into a house and encountering a whole family. The Japanese forced Chinese men to rape their own daughters, sons, to rape their mothers and brothers, their sisters, while the rest of the family was made to watch. Throughout the city of Nanking, random acts of murder occurred as soldiers frequently fired their rifles into panicked crowds of civilians, killing indiscriminately. Other soldiers killed shopkeepers, looted their stores, then set the buildings on fire after locking people of all ages inside. They took pleasure in the extraordinary suffering that ensued as the people desperately tried to escape the flames by climbing onto rooftops or leaping down onto the street. The incredible carnage, citywide burnings, stabbings, drownings, strangulations, rapes, thefts, and massive property destruction continued unabated for about 6 weeks from mid-December 1937 through the beginning of February 1938. Young and old, male or female, anyone could be shot on a whim by any Japanese soldier for any reason. Corpses could be seen everywhere throughout the city. The streets of Nanking were said to literally be run red with blood. Those who were not killed on the spot were taken to the outskirts of the city and forced to dig their own graves, large rectangular pits that would be filled with decapitated corpses resulting from killing contests which the Japanese held among themselves. Other times, the Japanese forced the Chinese to bury each other alive in the dirt. After this period unprecedented violence, the Japanese eased off somewhat and settled in for the duration of the war. To pacify the population during the long occupation, highly addictive narcotics, including opium and heroin, were distributed by Japanese soldiers to the people of Nanking regardless of age. An estimated 50,000 persons became addicted to heroin, while many others lost themselves in the city's opium dens. In addition, the notorious comfort woman system was introduced, which forced young Chinese women to become slave prostitutes, existing solely for the sexual pleasure of the Japanese soldiers. News reports of the happenings in Nanking appeared in the official Japanese press and also in the West. As page one reports in newspapers such as the New York Times, Japanese news reports reflected the militaristic mood of the country, in which any victory by the Imperial Army resulted in further expansion of the Japanese Empire, was celebrated. Eyewitnesses reports by Japanese military correspondents concerning the suffering of the people of Nanking also appeared. They reflected a mentality in which the brutality, dominance of subjugated or so-called inferior peoples was considered just. Incredibly, one paper, the Japan Adventure, actually published a running count of the heads severed by 2 officers involved in a decapitation contest as if it was some kind of sporting match. In the United States, reports published in the New York Times, Reader's Digest, Time magazine were greeted with skepticism from American public. The stories smuggled out of Nanking seemed almost too fantastic to be believed. Overall, most Americans had only a passive knowledge or little interest in Asia. Political leaders in both America and Britain remained overwhelmingly focused on the situation in Europe, where Adolf Hitler was reportedly rearming Germany while at the same time expanding the borders of the Nazi regime. Reich, through devious political maneuvers, back in Nanking, however, all was not lost. An extraordinary group of about 20 Americans and Europeans remaining in the city, composed of missionaries, doctors, and businessmen, took it upon themselves to establish an international safety zone using Red Cross flags. They brazenly declared a 2.5 square area in the middle of the city off limits to the Japanese. On numerous occasions, they also risked their lives by personally intervening to prevent the execution of Chinese men or the rape of women and young girls. These Westerners became the unsung heroes of Nanking, working day and night to the point of exhaustion to aid the Chinese. They also wrote down their impression of the daily scenes they witnessed, with one describing Nanking as hell on earth. Another wrote of the Japanese soldiers, "I did not imagine that such cruel people existed in the modern world." About 300,000 Chinese civilians took refuge inside their safety zone. Almost all the people who did not make it into the safety zone during the rape of Nanking ultimately perished. Yeah. Here's the forgettable Holocaust, 27 tragic photos from the rape of Nanking. These tragic photos and stories that captured the horrors of Nanking Massacre, aka the rape of Nanking, committed by Japanese soldiers against Chinese civilians in 37 and 38. Yeah. We know all about the horrors that had happened on our side of the world, but all too often when an atrocity had happened on the other side, we do not hear about it. Yeah. Alongside all the catastrophes that plagued Europe during World War II, the atrocities committed in Southeast Asia were every bit as disturbing, even if most of us in the West hardly ever learn about them in school. And few of the atrocities committed in Asia during World War II were as terrible as the Nanking Massacre, known as the Rape of Nanking. While Europe was struggling to hold off the Nazi war machine, China was fending off the Japanese invasion that first launched in late 1937. They fought hard, in the end losing as many as 20 million lives, the second most of any country involved in the war, to keep the Japanese Empire from conquering much of East Asia and the Pacific. As many as 17 million Chinese casualties weren't soldiers. They were civilians, unarmed and defenseless, and many of them were put through unimaginable hell before they were killed. Some of the worst of it occurred over the 6 weeks after the Japanese stormed into the Chinese capital of Nanking, known as Nanjing in December 37. The brutal march to Nanking, the rape and murder that would soon envelop Nanking started before the Japanese army even reached the city. The Japanese army was moving through China at the outset of their invasion, massacring and looting with strict orders to kill all captives. The Japanese did not stop there, though. Among the invading army, nothing was forbidden, and they believed that gave them strength. One Japanese journalist traveling with the 10th Army wrote in his notes that he believed the army was moving forward with such strength because of the tacit consent among officers and the men. They could loot and rape as they wished. The Nanking Massacre began. When the Japanese army reached Nanking, the brutality continued. The burning down the city walls, the people's homes and surrounding forests, and even whole villages situated in their path. They looted nearly every building they could find, stealing from the poor and rich alike. They then slaughtered scores of people they happened upon. Some victims of the Nanking were thrown into mass unmarked graves. Others were just left to rot in the sun. To the invading army, the rape of Nanking was sometimes even a game. Japanese magazines bragged about the contest between two soldiers, Toshikaki Muaki and Noda, who had challenged one another in a race to see who could slaughter 100 people with their swords first. Well, worse yet, the people these two men cut open weren't enemy combatants, killed on the battlefield while fighting for their lives. By the men's own admission, the victims were unarmed, defenseless people. Noda admitted after the war ended, we lined them up and cut them down, from one end of the line to the other. What's more, this admission wasn't an apology. Just seconds before, Noda had scoffed at his victims for letting him kill them, saying, "The Chinese soldiers were so stupid." He also added afterwards, I was often asked whether it was a big deal, and I said it was no big deal. The rape of Nanking. In the mere 6 weeks during which the Japanese perpetrated the Nanking Massacre, starting on December 13, 1937, an estimated 20,000 to 80,000 Chinese women were brutally raped and sexually assaulted by the invading soldiers. They sometimes went door to door, dragged out women and even small children, finally gang raping them. Then, once they'd finished with their victims, they often murdered them. Such killing wasn't just an act of senseless brutality either. These men were following orders, so that we will not have any problems on our hands, one commander told his men, referring to any woman they've raped, either pay them money or kill them in some obscure place after you have finished. The invaders, though, didn't even stop at simply murder. They made these women suffer in the worst ways possible. Pregnant women were cut open and rape victims were sodomized with bamboo sticks and bayonets until they died in agony. After I have heard or read such brutality, one missionary in Nanking, James M. McCollum wrote in his diary, rape, rape, rape. We estimate at least 1,000 cases a night and many by day. On December 16th, 7 girls ages range from 16 to 20 were taken away from the military college. Read a report from the International Committee, a group of foreigners who established the Nanking Safety Zone to provide haven for Nanking massacre victims. 5 returned. Each girl was raped 6 or 7 times daily. One old woman, 62 years old, went home near Hansen. Japanese soldiers came at night and wanted to rape her. Read another report from the committee. She said she was too old, so the soldiers rammed a stick up her, but she survived to come back. Meanwhile, one writer for the New York Times who was on the scene wrote, I drove down to the waterfront in my car and to get to the gate, I had to just climb over masses of bodies accumulated there. The car just had to drive over these dead bodies. Once he reached the waterfront, he witnessed the massacre of 200 men within just 10 minutes. The extent of these Japanese officials were aware of such atrocities during the Nanking massacre has long been a matter of intense debate. For one, Japanese General Iwan Matsuo, commander of the forces in China, claimed that he was unaware of mass crimes but nevertheless felt morally responsible. Ultimately, he was convicted and executed for his part in the massacre after the war, since which time the rape king had proved to be a most contentious issue. The legacy of the massacre. By the time the worst of the rape of Nanking had ended, an estimated 300,000 people were dead, mostly within a matter of weeks. Then, when Japanese soldiers and officials were tried and executed for war crimes just after World War II, the court found that at least 200,000 had perished during the rape of Nanking. However, death tolls estimate vary widely, with some ranging as low as 40,000. Moreover, intense controversy surrounding these estimates, reflecting just how divisive the forgotten Holocaust in the world, words of an author, Iris Chang, remains to this day. The Japanese government, for example, didn't officially apologize for the World War II era atrocities until 1995, and even that relatively recent apologetic stance hasn't been ununanimous or universal. In 1984, for example, the Japanese Army Veterans Association conducted interviews with Japanese veterans present during the rape of Nanking in an effort to refute reports of Japanese atrocities. However, the organizers of the researchers were surprised to find that the veterans were forthcoming about the widespread atrocities, and the official magazine of the Veterans Association was forced to run an apology for the rape of Nanking instead. Whatever the severity of war, over several special circumstances of war, psychologically, we just lose words faced with this mass illegal killing, as those who are related to the pre-war military. We simply apologize deeply to the people of China. It was truly a regrettable act of brutality. Within just the last 10 years, dozens of Japanese officials and politicians have refused to accept responsibility or denied that it happened altogether. In 2015, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe issued a statement to mark the 70th anniversary of World War II conclusion and drew worldwide drew widespread criticism for not actually apologizing in the process, which has helped fuel current tensions between China and Japan. To this day, denials of the atrocities persist despite countless first-hand witnesses from France, the United States, Germany, and Japan. The denials even persist despite photographs like the ones in the gallery above that make the truth of Nanking Massacre clear. Yeah. Yeah, that's this, and then it's, it's terrible what happened. And for the Japanese to act like this did not happen. And that's why I said, if you want to know what China's really after, if any country is going to suffer the hands of the Chinese, of Winnie the Pooh's government, it's going to be Japan. The Nanking Massacre, conventional Nanking Massacre, also called the Rape of Nanking, December 37 through January 38, mass killings and ravaging of Chinese civilians and capitulated soldiers by soldiers of the Japanese Imperial Army after its seizure of Nanking, China in December 1337 during the Siam-Japanese War that preceded World War II. The number of Chinese killed in the massacre has been subject to much debate, with most estimates ranging from 100,000 to 300,000. Destruction of Nanking, which had been the capital of nationalist China from 28 to 37, was ordered by Masui Iwan, commanding general of the Japanese Central China Front Army that captured the city. Over the next several weeks, Japanese soldiers carried out Masui's orders, perpetrating numerous mass executions and tens of thousands of rapes. The army looted and burned the surrounding towns and the city, destroying more than a third of the buildings. In 1940, the Japanese made Nanking the capital of their Chinese puppet government, headed by Wang Qingwei, shortly after the end of World War II. Matsui, a lieutenant general who had personally participated in the acts of murder and rape, were found guilty of war crimes by the International Military Tribunal for the Far East and were executed. The war crime in international law, serious violations of the laws of custom or customs of war as defined by international custom. Yeah. So there's, basically what we have here is, it's a pretty messed up history. Yeah. So I just wanted to I want to do a video about that to show that, it was terrible what happened. And Japan still this day does not acknowledge, and them, they should be worried. It's not Taiwan China is really after, it's Japan. If any country is going to suffer at the hands of the Chinese, it's going to be the fucking Japanese for what they did in Nanking. Yeah. They still haven't forgiven the Japanese for that because they won't truly acknowledge what they did. And they're not sorry for what they did. So, I just want to do that to talk about this. This is Gilgamesh. Have a great day.